I can explain the exam, the take-home exam first. So the take-home exam is on the last page of the handout. You guys have that. There are 4 questions, and they are very broad questions, and they are based on the second half of the class here, right? Second half of our semester. The first question has to do with, let's see, the topic where we talked about genre. Remember, we talked about genre, and we said that genre is a social, right? Social system or social system of convention. And the adjective, genre is a noun, right? So the adjective is generic. Generic. Yeah, it has the same meaning as general, generic, like that. Same spelling, but generic adjective. So we talk about different generic conventions, right, when we study genre. For example, the genre of newspapers, right? There will be some headlines, there will be some lead, and some headlines, and then follow by some headline will be the most. The headline will be the most important things because it tells you who, what, which, when, and so on. Okay. That's the most important thing, right? And then you have details later on. So later on, you have details. And you have, when you have details, you have quotations. Quotations from different sources, right? So if it's a news report about MERS, the new virus, you may have quotations from doctors, you may have quotation from scientists, like that, right? But the headline will tell you the MERS virus hit Korea, like that, right? Recently, 2 weeks ago, 3 people died, like that. So most important stuff will be around the beginning, right? Important stuff, and then later on, not so important. And newspaper report usually has no conclusion. I don't know why, but usually no conclusion because it's not like a typical piece of writing, and also the fact that you already tell off the most important part, which is in the beginning. But this generic structure, right? Generic structure, generic structure. This generic structure is for the present day news genre, right? But in the old days, maybe 17th or 16th century, we know that there is what we call the forerunner, right? Forerunner of news, like what we call pamphlet, right? Pamphlet. And the generic structure was so different, right? That in the old days, the generic structure was like chronological. Right? Chronological. And what happened first, what happened after, what happened afterwards, and so on. So chronological order. Right? And so the details, the most important details are not in the beginning. Not in the beginning. Like that. So this is the old days. Old news. And this is modern news. Modern. So what we are doing now is we are talking about the exam, which is on the last page of the handout. Okay, the exam. And we are, I'm trying to explain the exam questions. Right. This is question 1 on the exam, which you guys can see on the last page of the handout. So the first question has to do with genre or generic structure, right? Generic conventions. We say that genre is a system of conventions, writing convention or speaking conventions. If it's a lecture, like this lecture could be a genre, right? You need to have the beginning. In my case, I usually refer to what we did last time, and I give you some introduction, and then we go into the detail, and then I do the conclusion. So there's the generic structure for everything, for spoken or written text. Okay, and in the case of newspaper, also there are some generic conventions, such as in modern newspapers, You have in the headline most important details, right? Who does what to whom, at what time, how many people died, like that. And then you have details, and then you support your details with quotations from different people. If it's a murder case, if it's a report on a murder, you have quotations from police officers or witnesses, like that. And then no conclusion at the end, usually. But for old news, in the 16th or 17th century, we have more or less forerunners of news, like pamphlets and some broadsheets. And but the generic structure was different in that usually you have things in the chronological order, meaning what happened first will be in the beginning, and then later on, and so on. So that's the generic structure, let's see, of news. And for the introduction, for the research introduction, the bad news is I forgot to give you the introductions, the two introductions. So I will give you the introductions by email, okay? So I'll give you two introductions. So we can start here. Intro, one, intro, two. Some you can take my time here. No, I can use my research fine. Oh my god.
Research fund. Research
No,
fund.
it's okay. That's our shit. It's mine, it's not my money. Why? It's not my money.
It's not my money.
It's Hanya's money.
한약 money.
Hanya money, not mine. Thank you. I will send you guys an email with the introductions. There will be two introductions to a research paper. One is the introduction that was written perhaps 120 years ago. And the other one is a recent introduction, maybe in 2012, like that, 2013. So you have to compare. You have to compare the generic structure. Right, so compare the generic structure and contrast the differences. Okay, compare and contrast the similarities and differences. There was one handout that we studied on that day about different moves. You remember the term moves? Different moves that we see in a research introduction, right? So the first thing is you have to define the field. I don't remember exactly the term, but maybe not define, but define the field, right? So you have to establish, I think they use the term establish, define, or establish the field. So you have to set the field, right? That the field of discourse analysis, the field of syntax, the field of whatever, right? And then you state the problem or establish the niche, like that. How do you get to the point that you want to talk about? How do you get to your topic, like that? And there are other occupying the niche and so on. There are other steps, right? Which I don't remember the exact details and I don't remember the exact order, but usually there will be those steps, right? And we say that even though people participate in genres all the time, genre construction all the time, like even though I lecture all the time, even though I write papers all the time, people might not have the explicit knowledge of the exact moves, right? But they do that automatically. Just like when you speak Korean, you cannot explain your knowledge of Korean, but you do it, you follow the generic conventions like that. So I'll give you two introductions, intro 1, intro 2, and you can compare. And whether or not the moves are the same or different, right? Because they were written perhaps 100, 150 years apart, like that. So to see whether they are the same or not. I printed it out, but I forgot to include in here. Okay? So one is from the Transaction of Philosophical Society. This organization was oriented, scientifically oriented, and it was established in 17 something in England, and people have been writing papers and then send that paper to this journal all the time. So it's scientifically oriented, and the other one is modern day scientific paper. Okay, so we only look at the introduction part, right? The introduction part, not the whole paper. So that's number one. So after we finish our party, we'll come back to number two. Okay. So we're done with number one, right? Question one. So question two has to do with grammaticalization. Right? Oh, the due date for the exam is the 22nd of June, right? So you can do this by email. I'll be in Korea at that time, studying Korean. So number two has to do with grammaticalization. Grammaticalization, right, is the process by which a lexical item, right, the process by which a lexical item becomes a grammatical item or has a grammatical function. Item or function through time, right, through time. And usually at the end process, you will see the divergence of the original form of the original item and the new item, new grammatical item. For example, the verb kada that we look at, right, in class, you still use it as the physical verb to go, physical verb of movement to go from one place to another, but you can also use it as an aspect marker or a tense marker as well, right? So it's a divergence because you still use the verb in the same way that you originally have it as when you have it as a lexical item, and you use it as a grammatical marker also, right? And but when there's grammaticalization, there are different steps, right? There are different steps, or we call different pathway, or some people call it climb, right? So climb, pathway, or steps, same thing, that traces the change of one item to a grammatical item, one lexical to a grammatical item. Like you have some semantic fading or semantic bleaching. You remember that? So bleaching or semantic fading, right? It has to do with the fact that the physical, the concrete meaning will become less concrete, less and less concrete, and then it will be very abstract. Abstract in the sense of grammatical, right? When it's the last stage. So kada, to go, to physically go, and then you can use it as in the sense of operation, kada, right? And in other senses, like the aspect marker, and so on. Okay? Or you use it with things that are less abstract, like shikani kada, like that. So time flies, like that. So you use it with people or with concrete things first, and then you use it with less and less abstract things or concept, and then it will become a grammatical marker, like that. Okay? So semantic bleaching, and also there are other things, for example, phonological erosion or reduction. When it's a grammatical marker, it's not really important, right? So you tend to, in pronunciation, you tend to reduce the vowel sound to be the schwa sound in English, like going to gonna, like that, right? Let's go. So let us, right? We study that let us, then let's. So see us also gone. So it has become a clitic, remember? And then these days we just say go, like that. There's nothing. So let us go, let's go, like that, right? So phonological reduction, like that. And also there is a process from a full word being contracted, or we call it a clitic, right? So full word to become a clitic, right? Clitic, and perhaps a suffix, and then even zero in some cases, right? Even zero. When it has become a full grammatical marker, it's a zero, like that. Okay. Let's go. Let's don't, and so on, because let there is just a grammatical marker, right? Some people say let's don't do that. Let's don't do that instead of let us not do that. So it means that this is like a hortative marker or invitation marker only, but the main verb is here. So this is just in Korean, ja, like that, right? Don't do ja. Okay. What else? So phonological reduction, full word, semantic bleaching, and let's see what else. For reanalysis. Reanalysis. So re plus analysis, right? So speakers, what they do is they reanalyze the grammar, right? For example, I am going to London to marry, like that. And then I am going to London, and then I am going to like it, and it's going to rain, let's say. In this example, in the in the first one, in the first sentence, you have am going to here is a preposition, and London is just location or the goal, right? And then to marry, this to is, it used to be a preposition, but now it's not a preposition in this context. It's a verb marker, right? Infinitive marker that indicates a purpose, right? Purpose clause. So purpose clause. In order to, in other words, in order to marry, right? So I'm going to this place so that I can marry, so as to marry, like that. So you can see that going to London, that's one structure. Going plus to, I'm going to school, like that. And this is the purpose clause, so different, right? So there are two clauses there. But then there are times when we, I'm sorry, can I change here to I'm going to marry? There are times when we take out the place, right? There are times when we take out the place and just say I'm going to marry, and without to the place London. So in this case, people misunderstand the word to here, so that they think that, oh, it's the same to, right? It's the same to. So they think, they reanalyze, they misunderstand it, and they reanalyze it so that this is one chunk, one new chunk, when in fact it used to be a different chunk, because to marry here is the purpose clause. But here they mistake to marry, which is a purpose clause, they mistake it as a prepositional phrase. So when they do that, they reanalyze. So this is where the reanalysis occurs. And then in the third stage, after the reanalysis, right, you have verbs like it, which didn't occur in the original context, because when you do the purpose clause, it must have a purpose, right? You must have a purpose to do that in order to marry, right? But here, I'm going in order to like it or so as to like it doesn't work, at least not in the original context. So after the reanalysis, you have some unusual things, some unusual uses that pop up after as a result. So like it is not originally a purpose clause, right? But after the reanalysis and after it has become grammaticalized, that's possible, right? So this goes hand in hand with the fact that things are used with things that are more concrete become less and less concrete, and they can be used with less abstract, more abstract things. So like psychological verbs, for example, which cannot be purposive, right? And then you can use it with everything, as in this last example, number 4 here, is going to rain. So it here, which may be the rain or maybe nothing, like it here. Going here has no sense of go. Going to London still with the sense of kada. I'm going to marry maybe with some sense of kada. I'm going in order to marry. But I'm going to like it, no sense of going. And it's going to rain, no sense of going at all. So it goes hand in hand with the semantic bleaching there. So these steps, like semantic bleaching, phonological erosion, forward, and reanalysis, they may happen at the more or less the same time, together. They happen together, right? As the semantic bleaching happens, you have the reanalysis also, hand in hand. And the last one is extension, right? Extension of use through metaphor, right? Extension of use through metaphor. That is, this is what we have talked in passing, right? Here, that when you grammaticalize, or when an item has been grammaticalized, you extend the context of use. You extend from the context of purpose to some other context, like psychological verb here, or the weather verb, right? So the context of use have been extended, and also through metaphor, meaning that you compare, right? When you do metaphor, you compare two things, and you say that they are similar in some aspect, right? So here, going seem to be extended just around here from the sense of just kada, which is the movement, to when you go somewhere, right? So there's the movement part, and also the future part of it, right? Future part. So that's the extension through metaphor. Because when you go somewhere, I'm going to London to marry, you are in the process of going, and the marriage will happen in the future, right? That will come with the verb to go after you arrive at the place. So go will have the movement aspect and also the future aspect, and it's this future aspect that will be extended and that will become grammaticalized like that. And usually in many languages of the world, when you have the verb to go, like in Spanish, like in Italian, like in French, you can use the verb to go as a helping verb that indicates future time, just like English go. And also the verb to come is the opposite of go, right? In many of the world's languages, come will indicate past tense, right? Past tense, because you have to already have left the place in order to come somewhere, in order to arrive, right? So come usually indicates the past tense, but go usually indicates the future tense in many of the world languages. In Korean also you have a watta, right? A oda, or a kada, and so on. Okay, so that's grammaticalization. And we also talk about discourse markers in this class, right? And we look at the development of some discourse markers like the word well, for example, right, from Old English. And discourse markers are grammatical markers, right? Discourse markers are more or less grammatical items. They carry grammatical function. So you can talk about the development of discourse markers as a case study of grammaticalization also, right? Because discourse markers used to be lexical items, like the word you see or say, see and say, right? Do you see that? Do you see that? But nowadays, we use it as a discourse marker. See, I was right. See, I was right, like that. See, I was right. So this is not the verb to see itself, but kind of engagement marker to ask the listener to check with him that his understanding and your understanding are on the same page, like that. It's from do you see? Do you see that? And so on. Okay. And the word well also, right? Well used to be an interjection that means like listen now, like that. But now well suggests or well indicates that there's some problem, that some expectations are not met, like that. So discourse markers are examples of grammaticalization. Okay. So that's number 2. Give me one example for number 2 and describe how that item has been grammaticalized and has shown the semantic bleaching process and then phonological erosion, reduction, full word, duclitic to suffix or to zero even, and also what else? Reanalysis and so on. Okay. And as in you see, for example, you see here, there's no tense, there's no you, there's no subject, do you see? So when it has become a pragmatic marker or discourse marker like this, it's zero, right? It's zero in the sense of before it was like, do you see that? Do you see that? I was right, like that, right? And even before, see is a verb to mean to see, to actually poda, to see things. Did you see that? And then I was right, like that. Did you actually see that as the evidence? Did you see the evidence? And I was right. And then the two clauses have become grammaticalized and then has become one clause. Okay. And then do you see? See in the sense of understanding. And finally, see, I was right. So in the last one, you don't actually have any tense, you don't have any subject, you don't have any verb of you, verb of do, so it's zero in that case. Okay. And then in terms of metaphoricalization or extension of use, the word see used to be see with the eyes, and then when you see with the eyes, the sense that co-occurs with that is understanding, right? So understanding, like that. So yeah, I see. When you say I see, I see. When you indicate your understanding, I see, like that. So see here is not to see, but understanding. So it's the extension through metaphoricalization to metaphor. Okay. So that's number 2. Number 3, we talked about the use of thou and you. Remember? Thou and you. And we said that thou and you were different in terms of sociolinguistic facts, right? We said that the word thou is usually the low form of you, right? That's the generalization that we can make. So thou, kind of low form of you. But you is the high form, meaning the respect form, right? High form or respect, indicating respect. But that's not always the case, right? Because in one of the papers that we have in our class, there are many factors that go into the scenario, like the gender, the register or the situation. Is it in court? So register has to do with situation. Is it formal? If it's a formal situation, maybe the use of thou and you has already been prescribed or has already been written down that you are supposed to use you and thou in X and Y situations like that. So who should use what? So register will go into play, gender will go into play, and type of data also go into play. Type of data. So we cannot say for certain, right? We cannot say for certain that there is a clear-cut division between thou and you, and thou is always low form, and women use that, or men use that, and you is always the high form. We cannot say for clear-cut like that. But there's the basic distinction like this that we talk about that may happen in many cases, in most cases, like that. And people from the same rank will use thou, right? Same rank will use thou, right? A friend to a friend, like that, right? Just like no in Korean, right? Friends will use no, like that. Or from higher position person to lower position person will use thou, right? Meaning the higher position will use higher people, and then lower position, so we'll use thou, like that, right? But when you go the opposite direction, from lower to higher, you would use you, like that. And sometimes in the data, depending on what type of data, of course, you will see people switch, right? That we saw some examples of in class. People switch between thou and you when they want to degrade, or when they want to show contempt, right, toward the other person. They will switch from you to thou in a sentence, right? In the same discourse, in the same sentence, to convey their emotion state, psychological state, like that. Okay? So that's what we talk about when we talk about thou and you. And the development of the thou and you, remember the development in Old English, thou, no, right? No thou. You only have you, right? You, and ye, and so on. And we have different cases, right? And in Middle English, you have the th form, which is thou and thee, and so on, together with you and ye, like that, right? And then in early modern English, you have that distinction that the thou is the lower form, the you is the higher form, like that, the respect form. Because the you in Middle English and in Old English, the you is the plural form, remember? The plural. And thou and thee is the singular, second person. So this plural form is the polite form or is the high form, because perhaps because due to some historical reasons that you usually address the king with the plural form, because there used to be two kings in the Roman Empire, one king in Rome and the other king in Istanbul, Turkey, like that. The Roman Empire was big, so you have two kings, so they used words like we and you, meaning you too, like that. So the plural form has become the polite singular form, right? The plural form, you and ye, have become the polite singular form, right? So, and then that distinction is very clear in many cases in early modern English before it faded away towards the end of early modern English. So that's number 3, okay? Number 4, formalism and functionalism. This is very recent, right? Which is the last class that we met perhaps last week, right? So we talked about linguistic change from the point of view of formal linguistics namely Chomskyan tradition, generative grammar, right? And we talked about the fact that they explain language change in terms of parametric changes, remember? So that's how they account for language change. Because to them, and we'll talk about that today also, to generative linguists, the Chomskyan tradition, you have UG, right? People, everyone starts with UG, meaning universal grammar. We are born with a set of rules, right, that are hardwired to our brain, somewhere in our brain, and there are many principles. So in the UG, there are principles, right? Principle meaning rules, in other words. Rules that will allow you to construct grammatical sentences in each language, right? And those rules are the same. No matter if you are Korean, no matter if you are Thai, no matter if you are American, we are all born with the same set of principles. For example, all sentences or all clauses must have a subject. That's one principle, right? All sentences must have a subject. Or remember the X-bar theory, that in all the world's languages, phrases look the same. X-bar theory says that all phrases look the same. All phrases look the same or have the same structure. Look the same or have the same structure, right? Which is XP goes to X aspect, which you already know, goes to X bar and adjunct, and then you have the X and then the complement like that. In every language in the world, the structure of a phrase is like this, exactly like this. Will account for differences here, okay? Every phrases will look like this. And the reason why it's called X bar, if you haven't studied syntax, bar is here, right? They call it the bar because that's the intermediate step. Intermediate step. That is to say, the bar is not the top, see? The top is always a P, meaning phrase. And the bottom is always just X, meaning it's the word level. This is lowest level is word. Word like destroy, destruction, destroy. A verb, a noun, you can have anything. And this is the level of phrase, destruction of the enemy, bigger level. Bigger, and then lowest level, biggest, lowest, and then you have intermediate steps. Intermediate steps are steps that are not the whole phrase and it's not the whole word either, right? So you can have so many intermediate steps. You can have many bars if you have so many modifiers, adjuncts and modifiers, right? And so if you have so many modifiers, you can have many steps, right? And you can see that they do it this way. It's only binary, right? It's only binary, meaning it's only two, binary. You don't have three branches. Why? Because they say that this more precisely indicates the combination of things. When you when you merge things, when you combine things, you have to have at least two. You cannot have one, right? Because one cannot be by itself. It has to be merged with something. So you have to have at least two. So let's do two like that. That's the minimal requirement for two, right? And the number two will precisely describe the nature of the relationship of two things that got merged like that. So rather than three. So you can have so many bars. But so coming back to here, we are all born with UG, and UG, which is universal grammar, consists of principles or rules, right? And these rules make us able to make any sentences in a language at all. And there are many rules that you have to study when you study syntax, like all sentences must have a subject, or the X bar theory is one component of the UG like that. And there are other things like binding principle. And I won't go into that because not everybody is keen on syntax, binding theory, like anaphors must be bound, pronominals must be free, our expression is free, whatever, right? So this is also a principle, right? And we have so many principles in our head like that. So we are all born with this. And then why is Korean different from English? And why is English different from Thai? Because we have parameters. Parameters. So parameters are options. Parameters are options that people can choose, that speakers can choose. And these options, may I add, these options are limited in number, meaning one or only two options. So you think of parameters like switches, like light switches, on or off, right? So in the case of principle, like all sentences must have a subject. Now in Korean, you can choose to drop a subject. Pap mokko, like that, pap mokko so, right? Pap mokko so. In Korean, you can have and you can choose not to have. But still, this principle is true, right? That all sentences must have a subject. Yes, pap mokko so, you, right? It has a subject, but it's just that you choose not to have it present. You choose to not represent it overtly. So in Korean, you set the parameters to yes, the subject can be dropped. So it's just like you push the light switch to the yes part. Yes, the subject can be dropped. But in English, can you do that? You have to push the switch to no, the subject cannot be dropped. In 99% of the cases, right? Like that. So you can see that for each parameter, we have only two options, yes or no, like that. So that explains differences, right, between languages. Even though all sentences must have a subject in all languages, in some languages you can represent it covertly, no subject to be seen, to be heard. But you can represent it also no-nun or something like that also. But in English, it's a no, always no. Okay? So that's explain why languages are different. But we are still the same, right? The same in terms of principles. But parameters will make principle different in one or the other way, like that. So generative grammarians, generative syntacticians, generative linguists explain language change in terms of parametric changes. So from one generation, let's say early modern English speaker, to another generation, so G1 to G2, how does the grammar change? They change the parameters like that, right? In one period, you allow the verb to be at the end and the object to be here, like I, you, loved, in one generation. In the other generation, you change it to I love you, right? I loved you, like that. That's because the parameter of V2, we call it V2, you don't have to know that, but V2 parameter, meaning verb first or verb last. So here, you have the verb here, right, as the last thing. But then in another generation, you change the parameter to this, right? And it may take time for the two systems to coexist, right? In between the two generations, people will start saying, I love you. And then people will also say, I, you, love, coexist, before this get thrown out of the system completely, perhaps maybe in modern English, like that. So they explain language change as changes in parameters, right? And when they explain, when they describe how languages change, they describe the change of parameters. Right? They explain it in terms of the change of parameters. So this is number 4. Okay? And number 4 is also concerned with what we'll be talking about today. Today, our topic is history of linguistics. Because we studied history of English linguistics, right? Now, I think that it's a good time to critically look at history of linguistics. And because when you study something, you should know the history of the field itself also, right? So that you know where you are heading and you know how it developed into what you are doing today. So today we'll do history of linguistics, okay? So history of linguistics, which will be the final topic for our class, okay? And when I was a graduate student, I had a chance to take a class, this class, history of linguistics. It was the full semester, so we study each period of linguistics from very, very, very old time, ancient time, from before Christ, like in India, in Sanskrit, like that. But we study linguistic thinking, linguistic thoughts, starting many hundred years ago before the birth of Christ even. So, but in this class, since we don't have enough time, we will not do that, right? We will not be talking about grammarians in India or grammarians in Mesopotamia and anything like that, but we'll start with what we call modern linguistic thought. Modern linguistic thought. We'll start with that in our class, okay? But it's for you to know that people study languages a long time ago, right? Before there's a field called linguistics. But we will, for the purposes of our class, we'll start with modern linguistic thought. Modern linguistic thoughts actually only started, it is modern, right? Not ancient. Only started in the maybe 17th to 18th century, right? Only. So that's called modern, early modern also, right? And you know that in that period, which is early modern English, right? In early modern English, we have the discovery of the New World, which is America, and also discovery of Africa, the Caribbean, and so on. And there's trading, and there's slave trading also. So you came into contact with people from different cultures, from Africa, from Asia, from India, from the Caribbean, and so on, right? So when you came into contact with those so-called exotic cultures, exotic languages, you are exposed to words, sentences, or the languages and cultures that are not English, not Indo-European. So in this period, people started collecting word lists, dictionaries, or religious texts from exotic cultures like African languages, Asian languages, American Indian languages, because that goes hand in hand with colonization, right, of the world. So you have word lists, grammars, dictionaries, and religious texts that people collected in order to communicate with exotic peoples, exotic cultures. And people became interested in debates about language origins and etymology, right? So etymology has to do with the origin, the study of the origins of word. Just like you study the origin of Korean words. You have to trace it back to Hanja, to Chinese, and then Chinese to classical Chinese, like that, right? So you can do that in English as well. You trace the origin of a word back to Old French, and then Old French to Latin, Latin to Indo-European, like that. So it started out like that, right? That how words can be related or not related. And eventually, when you started out with the etymology, right, comparing words and look at the origins of each word, etymology, you have historical linguistics. Historical and comparative linguistics. That makes sense, right? Because, why is that? Because when you started out with etymology, you look at the origins. Oh, this word came from this Hanja, this Chinese word, and this Chinese word came from this classical Chinese word, and so on. So it's historical in nature when you look at the origins, and also it's comparative in nature, meaning you compare this word to another word, and when you go to go back to the origin, the very origin of the word, then you know the roots of the word, right? You have to compare languages, different languages, right? In order to get to the proto-language. So this actually was the main concern of the first generation of modern linguists, right? So historical linguistics is the first field of modern linguistics. You can say it like that, right? So historical linguistics that we are doing. And there are some prominent figures in historical linguistics. On the first page of the handout, you have Sir William Jones, who lived from 1746 to 1794, right? Sir William Jones. So in fact, Sir William Jones was interested in comparing and describing cultures. So he was interested in comparing cultures and peoples, cultures and different peoples, meaning different groups of people, right? Different people, describing culture, describing exotic culture and people. But when you describe cultures and people, you have to describe their languages as well, right? Because language is part of the culture. So he was more or less an anthropologist rather than a linguist. You can say that, right? And he is usually credited with founding historical comparative linguistics, when in fact his real intention was just to describe exotic cultures and people, right? But people usually cited him as the father of historical linguistics like that. But he has made some comments about the similarities between languages, which you can see on the first, in the first paragraph of the part under prominent figures. The Sanskrit language, right? The Sanskrit language, whatever be its antiquity, is of a wonderful structure, more perfect than the Greek, more copious, meaning many, than the Latin, more exquisitely refined, meaning clean, pure, than either, yet bearing to both of them a stronger affinity, stronger similarity, both in the roots of the verbs and in the forms of grammar that could possibly have been produced by accident, and so on. So here he is describing the fact that his observations that Sanskrit looks the same as Greek, look the same as Latin, because they must be related. And that relation cannot be produced by just accident. It must be some historical reasons. But he made some, stupid comments like, oh, it's more perfect than Greek, more copious than Latin, more exquisitely pure, refined than either, right? Modern linguists wouldn't say it like that. We wouldn't say that one language is better, is perfect than another language, because all languages are equal, right? But here he seems to think that Sanskrit, which is a very, very old language of India, Sanskrit has a lot of inflections. Inflections that you see in Old English, in Middle English, but more. Sanskrit has more inflections. So he seems to think that languages that have more inflections are purer, are more refined, and are more perfect. So languages that have lots of inflection, for him is perfect. So language that has no inflection is like savage language, like that. That's his opinion, which is not accepted in modern English, right? We don't think that languages that have no morphology, have no inflection, are not pure, are degraded. We don't think it like that, right? So he makes comments like that. Okay, so he was not very interested in linguistics. As I said, he was interested in cultures and people, but he made some comments like that. So people credited him for being the founder of historical linguistics. Okay, and another person that's interesting to know is, this is on the last paragraph of the first page, Rasmus Rask. Rasmus Rask. He wove together historical linguistic observations leading later on to what we know as Grimm's Law. So he discovered what we know nowadays as Grimm's Law. You remember Grimm's Law? So Grimm's Law, it has the name Grimm here as one of the two brothers of Grimm, right? Two Grimm's brother that we have as a Grimm story, Grimm's fairy tale like that. Grimm's Law, but Rasmus Rask actually discovered the law before Grimm, but it was Grimm who made the law famous, who made the law well known to people. So people call the law by the name of Grimm rather than Rasmus Rask, right? But Rasmus Rask just didn't formulate the law clearly, but he discovered the similarities, the same similarities that Grimm made famous, right? So Grimm's Law, we studied Grimm's Law, right? That, you know, things like BH, TH, KH will have lost the aspiration, D aspiration. That's from the aspiration from Indo-European, we study, right, to Germanic. So Grimm Law is a set of rules that describe changes from Indo-European languages, Latin, Greek, French, English, and so on, to Germanic, which English is a part of, right? So when you have BH, DH, and KH in Indo-European, you will have just the B, the D, and the G in Germanic, like that. B, D, and G in Germanic, like that. And you have three sets, and each set involves de-aspiration or fricativization and so on. Right? That was what we studied before. So actually it was Rasmus Rask who discovered all these different rules, but it was Grimm who made the rules famous or well known, so they were called Grimm's Law, like that. Okay. And then there's an exception to Grimm's Law, and we study that, which is Werner's Law, and it has to do with stress, where the stress fall, if the stress falls on the syllable, right? If the stress falls on the syllable after, right? After, then the Grimm Law won't apply like that. Okay, so that's the Werner's Law. Werner discovered it. Now, so there's Grimm's Law, and exception to Grimm's Law is explained by Werner's Law, by the guy Werner, right? Now, at this point, you see that this must have been a great discovery in the 18th and 19th century, right? Because they can explain the relationship between Indo-European and Germanic, and the laws here have no exception, because the exception can be explained under Werner's Law, and now they can predict and they can explain why Indo-European words have the BH, but in Germanic word it has just only a B. So every difference can be explained. So this is a very great discovery during that time, not now, during that time. And we move to the next period, which is we call Neo-Grammarians. Neo-Grammarians are new. Neo is new, right? New grammarians. So they are group based, most of them based in Germany, and their famous motto, their famous principle is sounds law. Sounds law, have no exception. Have no exception. They believe that so firmly. Why is that? Because they believe in the discovery of Grimm's Law and Werner's Law. Okay? So sound laws have no exception, meaning that when you if you really discover the laws, like Grimm's Law or Werner's Law, then you can explain every sound change. and you can explain the relationship between languages. And to them, laws have no exception like that. If there's an exception, it means that you don't know the real law like that. Okay. The next period is, this is very important in linguistics, structuralism. Structuralism, structuralism, and structuralism. For structuralism, the interest has shifted from neo-grammarians. Neo-grammarians are interested in historical linguistics, right? But structuralism shifted the interest, there's movement, right? There's movement in linguistic thought. Shifted the interest to the study of current linguistic system, meaning not history, not origin of words, not the roots of word, but now the language as spoken, as used right now, right? So you have structuralism, and structuralism treats each language as a more or less coherent and integrated system, right? So there are many people that contribute to this movement from different corners of the world. So you have people in France, you have people in Russia, you have people in US, and you have people in Europe, which is France and other European cities, right? So you cannot attribute it to one school or one person or one country in particular, right? Unlike neo-grammarians who were usually German, right? But you have different people working under the same kind of belief. I'm sorry, not here, but structuralism around the world. In France, you must know this person, right? Because he is famous in perhaps every discipline. Saussure, right? Ferdinand de Saussure. Have you ever heard of that person? Ferdinand de Saussure. This is on page 3. And he was famous in every discipline, also in literature. People who study literature, literary criticism will have to know Saussure as well. So Saussure was interested in analyzing the system. So he says that a language has two parts. There is the langue part, this is in French, and there is parole, langue and parole. Okay, I have these terms. Where's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Paragraph 6 on page 3. I have these two terms in paragraph 6 on page 3. Langue and parole. To him, the object of linguistics is to study langue. Langue here is from language, right? So language here is a kind of social fact, right? So to Saussure, we have to study langue, not parole. Parole is the way you use language. That's parole. Individual way of using language. That's parole. But langue is this abstract, systematic set of rules, right? That exists within a language, right? It's independent, and it pre-exists. It exists before. It pre-exists speakers. Meaning that before we are all born, Korean already exists, right? English already exists. So it pre-exists, right? Our birth even. And this systematic set of rules is very abstract, and we have to study that. That's the object of modern linguistics. Object of study, object of linguistic study. And what is parole? Parole is the way each person uses language, the way each person uses language. He said that in order to get to the langue, in order to study the abstract systematic set of rules which is independent and which pre-exists the speaker, we have to do it through parole, right? Because how do we get to Lang, which is the abstract system? We have to examine individual speech to get to Lang, like that. So there's the relationship between Lang and parole. The real object of linguistics is to get to this stage, to Lang. We can explain the abstract systematic set of rules, but we can only do it through parole, right? By observing how people speak, by observing how people use language, like that. So from parole to Lang. And this will be something that Chomsky inherited, right? Which is the system of Lang is perhaps like Eugene that we talk about, like that. And then also in Russia, there's this school that you may have heard of, Prague School of Linguistics. Prague School in Europe and also in Russia by Prince Tubetskoy. And other people, Baudouin de Cotigny and so on. This is on page, I think, page 4 also. And Roman Jakobson also in Russia, Roman Jakobson. All of these people can be credited for being the founders of structural linguistics. And we study the notion of, if you study phonology, you guys know phonemes, right? Phonemes, the smallest significant units of sound. You know the distinctive features when you study phonology, right? Distinctive features. Like P is a bilabial sound, and it is voice, is stop. So all those are features, distinctive features of each sound. So these guys developed the notions of phonemes, distinctive features, what else? Grapheme, morpheme, and markedness, the issue of markedness, and so on. So really, we have inherited a lot of legacy, right, from them. The concept of phonemes, distinctive features, or complementary distribution even from these guys, okay? So they think that language has this structure, right? And it consists of the set of roles, and each unit is different from another unit. P and B are different because they have different distinctive features, like that. So that's the structure of each sound, like that. So these guys are very influential, right? And in the US also, in the US we have people, I'll be quick here, we have people like Boas, we have people like Bloomfield, Boas, and then Sapir. All of these are American structuralists, okay? And I will talk about them together, right? The way that they did structural linguistics in 1930s or 1940s is like this, okay? So they collect a corpus. They are from the US, so they collected a corpus. Corpus meaning examples of sentences, example of words, example of pronunciation. So they collected a corpus of how people speak, of people's speech. Could be from exotic languages, like many American Indian languages, because they are from the US, right? These guys, Bloomfield, Boas, Franks Boas, and Edward Sapir, collected a corpus of people's speeches, usually American Indian languages, and then they would group the corpus under 3 levels: phonology, the sound, morphology, and syntax, like that. And then they analyze each level, and then describe each level. And then, good. That's it. This is the method of structural linguistics in the 30s or in the 40s. So if I give you an example, this is on page 6, okay? Page 6. This is on page 6. You see in the second paragraph to do linguistics, you see that example on page 6. Tom needed 2 buses. Tom needed 2 buses. But his wife's stupid brothers delivered a boat. So let's say that that's the first step. They collected a corpus. So this is one sentence in a corpus, right? People do say it like that. And then they will analyze that sentence on 3 levels: phonology, morphology, and syntax. And in phonology, they notice that T in Tom, like that, is not the same as T in stupid, because they just sound different. And T in boat is also different from these, right? Boat, the T in boat could be unreleased T, like that in phonetics. So they categorize and they label the sounds. Like T in Tom is aspirated T, Tom, like that. And then T in stupid is stupid, not stupid, but stupid, like that. So T in stupid is unaspirated, and T in boat is unreleased, not released. You don't say boat, but boat, just boat, without releasing the air. So they do it like this, and they label each sound that is different. So they categorize and label each sound. So that's the level of phonology. Level of morphology, they see that, oh, the verb needed has ed, but when you pronounce it, it's needed with a vowel, ud. But when you have the verb delivered, you don't say delivered. You say just deliver plus d. There's no vowel there. So they say that, oh, even though they are past tense marker, one has a vowel plus a d, the other has no vowel, only the d. That's the level of morphology. And there are other things that you can do with the s, and s ending can be pronounced so many ways, right? So that's the level of morphology. For the level of syntax, they categorize words into noun phrases, verb phrases, conjunction, prepositions, like that. So after that, the work is done. The work is considered done. So that's the level, that's the analysis, that's the method of structural linguistics, right? So they can write trees, like Tom is S, noun phrase, noun Tom, verb deliver, like that. So that's how they analyze. And then that's the level of syntax. The level of morphology, they will do this, that, or if the D ending and not the id or ending, like that. So this is all they did, which is to look at it on different levels and then describe and label. End. And each language can be described in these terms, like that. But more or less in modern linguistics that we are doing now, we still do things like this, right? But the aim is different. And also perhaps the end point is also different. We just don't do it for the sake of doing, meaning we don't draw trees just in order to describe each level and not just to name that this is a noun, this is a verb. We don't do it like that. But according to Chomsky, remember our aim is to describe the UG, right? Doing this cannot get to UG, because what you do, all you do is just to label. This is a noun, this is a verb phrase, this is a D, not the ud, like that. This is a phoneme, this is an allophone, just that. Just only labeling. But it will not get you to UG, right? So Chomsky came around in 1950s with his syntactic structure, which is the first book, right? And there are some problems. He said that there are some problems with the structural linguistic. For example, if you analyze John is pleased, John is easy to please. John is easy to please, and John is eager to please. Eager to please. They share the same linguistic structure. If you do the structural analysis, NP, VP, same. John and P. Is the V. Is he eager? Adjective. To infinitive marker. Please and please verb. Exact same structure, exact same label that structural linguistics will give you. But the meaning is so different. Because John is easy to please. You please who? You please John, right? You please John. But John is eager to please. Meaning John is very excited to please. Please who? Not John, but to please Krista, to please Songho, to please Dejin, like that, right? So how do we get that difference? Although the structure is the same. So he says that there is this problem with structuralism. And this doing just labeling things and cutting things into morphemes, phonemes will not get you to UG, right? So for Chomsky, the object of linguistics is not to label, is not to describe the structure of one language only, but to get to, as we talked before, the UG. What rules, what set of rules that we all share, all human beings share, right? So that's the thinking of Chomsky, right? We need to explain linguistic knowledge of native speakers, that's to say, and we will not proceed by collecting people's speech, but we can use our own intuition. Does that sound strange in Korean? Does that sound strange in English if you are a native speaker? So that's why when you do Chomskyan syntax, you never examine sentences that are longer than 8 words or 10 words, right? You will have sentences like who, love, whom, and you talk about the movement of the WH words and so on like that, because you are observing your intuition like that, right? And Chomsky's aim has been consistent for many years now, but what has changed is the way that we work towards the UG. Before we have the X bar theory, right? Remember XP, expect, X bar, and then you have so many bars level till you get the X and then complement. He said that that's the one component of the UG. But nowadays, we don't do that anymore. Why? He said that this is not economical enough. You know, economical? Economical meaning that when you do science, and he considers linguistics science, when you do science, your theory must be as economical as possible. Meaning that you should explain, right? You should explain. You should be able to generalize, right? A lot of things, a lot of output based on as few rules as possible. That's good sign, right? If you have to explain phenomenon X, Y, Z, phenomenon X, Y, Z, A, B, C with different rule. Rule 1, rule 2, rule 3, rule 4, rule 5, rule 6. That's not good science. Good science is you have just one rule that can explain all the output like that. That's the good theory, right? That's a good theory. So your theory must be as economical as possible. Doing this is economical but not enough. Why do we have to start out with this structure hardwired in our brain? Then to be less economical, the really necessary, we start out with really necessary thing is just the notion of merge. No more this shell, we call it the shell because it's like, oh, it's this, and then you put words in, right? No more shell now. So just the operation of merge. So if I want to say I love you, first speaker have to do love and you merge. Like that, we get a verb phrase. And then merge with the subject, which is noun phrase, you. Then we get a sentence. So merge is what we have. And then the other one is move, merge and move. That's minimalism, right? Nowadays, the thinking is minimalism. Minimalism. The X bar is not minimalism because, as you can see, how could it be minimal? Because you have X bar here, X bar here, X bar here. It's not minimal. So economical, minimal is just move and merge. So you just merge two things, you get one product. You merge it with another thing, you get another product. Simple, right? And economical. And then if something appears somewhere else that's not the original position, you say that it moves. Like, do you love me? Then it moves. The past tense here moves like that. So he keeps refining. People keep refining to the most economical explanation of language phenomena as possible. So that's why people throw away this, right? And then go to minimalism. But still, the aim is to discover the UG. And you know, theory is not a fact, so theory can keep changing as long as you have good evidence for why you need to change the theory. So the evidence for changing this theory to this theory is that let's try, he just said, let's try to be as economical as possible, and let's try minimalism as a way to explain it. And then people changed the way of thinking from X bar to this, because he said, let's try, like that. He doesn't claim that it's true, but he said, let's try like that. Let's try minimalism like that, okay? And finally, there is the other camp that we haven't talked much and not taught a lot, which is the opposite of Chomskyan, right? Chomskyan tradition is what we call formalism, but we have functionalism. Functionalism now. Functionalism now. For functionalism, we pay attention to the function. Function and then structure. Meaning, what do I mean by that? They say that the function gives rise to the structure. Okay? The function gives rise to the structure. But for Chomskyan, they are only interested in the syntax, right? Syntax, which is the form or which is the structure. But for functionalism, they say that the function motivates the structure. Okay, motivates the structure. Now I have an example to show you how they are different. And actually, functionalism is also as influential as Chomsky. And why do I say that? Because the distinction between this is important, and you need to know the distinction. Why is that? Because different linguistic departments in the world, they'll do either formalism or functionalism, not both, okay? For example, in California, if you are interested, Berkeley, California, Berkeley, functionalism only, like that. And University of Washington, functionalism only. California, Santa Barbara, functionalism only, like that. And in most European schools, in England, in most European schools, functionalism only. Australia also, functionalism only. Stanford is kind of different because there are some formalist linguists there, and there are some functionalist linguists there. So Stanford is kind of in between both. But what's interesting is that right? You ask me. So who does functionalism? MIT, only functionalism, like that. Or Harvard also. On the east side, Maryland also. Because, why do you ask? You might ask me why. Why mostly on the east side? Because they are Chomsky students, they are students of Chomsky students, like that. And people like Chomsky's students had teaching jobs in Maryland, in Harvard, for example. So in that area, they will do formalism. So if you like that, so you go to those departments like that, right? And so you see that functionalism is also influential because it can sway a lot of departments in the world to be in one orientation or the other orientation of formalism, right? and there's no reconciliation between the two camps. So people just do what they are interested in, and there's no conclusion as to who is right or who is wrong, right? Functionalism, as I said, from function to structure. They say that you have the structure you have because of the function. Okay, this is on page 9. In Texas, Rice University, which is also a famous private university, they only do functionalism. Texas at Austin, mainly functionalism also. So it's kind of different. University of New Mexico, functionalism also. Washington, University of Washington, formalism, like that. Let's see. On page 9, you see the two examples, 1 and 2. Okay, let's look at 1A. Who do you think that John loves? It comes from 1B. You think that John loves who? Okay, right? That's the original. And then the WH word who got moved to the front. And the formalists will argue that who moves cyclically, right? Who moves to the position, the C position before John, and then move to the front again, right? So cyclic movement. But in number two, who do you think that that loves John? This one is not possible with the word that. You cannot say you think that who loves John. You cannot say that. And formalist linguistic Chomskyan would explain why we cannot say to. They would explain that there's no proper government, meaning that the word who is properly governed using the C command, whatever they use, right, by love, right? And then when it moves, you have the proper government, so it can be moved. So that's their explanation. So they have to come up with some explanation as to why to is not possible. So to is not possible because the word that blocks the proper government in the C command thing, right? In the C command principle. C command is a principle. That's their explanation. So very form-based. It cannot be there because something blocks the government. That's their explanation, right? They have to come up with that sort of explanation. But for functionalist linguists, they say that to is not possible because it creates a perceptual problem. When we use it, the word that creates a perceptual problem because the word could be misread as the subject of subordinate clause, meaning you think that could be a complementizer, right? I think that he, I think that I, like that. So if you have the word that, it could be misread. It could be perceptually misread as a subject. And when you have the word that, it doesn't work as well. So they say that this function, this perceptual function, motivates the prohibition of the word that, like that. So each camp focuses on different type of explanation, right? The functionalists would say that the word that cannot be there because it doesn't have any function there. And the only function it has is to confuse people, right? Because the word that there has the same function as the word who, could be the same function, could be misread as the same function as the word who. So the word that is not proper there, like that. So it is usage-based for functionalists, right? And in our explanation of grammaticalization, we say that there is metaphoricalization, extension of use from concrete to abstract. That's a functional explanation, right? And you study cognitive linguistics with Kim Il-gon, for example, that's functionalism also. Why do we use certain things? Because it's cognitively suitable, cognitively appropriate to use those forms, right? And we can explain the use of the tense through cognitive linguistics as well. So that's cognitive linguistics is functionalistic, right? In principle. And another example that I have to show, which is the last example, is the set of examples from A to D on the same page, page 9. John punched Bill, John re-punched Bill, John punched the holes in the paper, John re-punched the holes in the paper. Number B is out of the question. Native speakers will not say that. Punch here in A, John punched Bill, is to hit. John hit Bill, punch Bill. But you cannot say John re-punched Bill, meaning punch again and again. You cannot do that. Why? Number C, John punched the holes in the paper to make a hole, right? You use the puncher. But you can say John re-punched the holes in the paper. That's an interesting question. Why you can use re with punch in C and D, but not punch in A? Why you cannot do that, right? Although it's the same word punch, although the meaning is a little bit different. One is to hit, the other one is to make a hole. You can do that with the make a hole, but you cannot do that with punching, which is to hit, right? Formalists cannot give a proper explanation of this, because punch is also in both. Punch is a transitive verb. There's no difference between the structure, right? So they have to come up with some type of explanation, right? But I don't know what they would say. But for functionalist linguists, they would say that you can do re-punch, which means to make a hole again in D, because the word re in English means again, right? Mean again. And it presupposes a previous. It presupposes the word re when you use it presupposes a previous state. It presupposes a previous state of the situation, right? A previous stage of the affair, right? In number C, John punched the holes in the paper, and John re-punched the holes in the paper. So he punched before, right? And he did it again to make the hole, perhaps to make the holes more complete, or to make additional holes. So it presupposes that the stage before was not complete or was not satisfactory, like that. Okay, so that's the explanation for C and D. The use of re, which means again, presupposes a previous state, which is not satisfactory or which is not good enough. But for A and B, for A and B, you cannot say re-punch because it doesn't presuppose the previous stage like C and D. You may ask me, oh, I punched and then I'm not satisfied with my punching, my hitting, so I want to do that again and again, right? Why is that not true, right? So the thing is that for functionalist explanation, they say that it's not common to do the re-punching. It's not the common usage. It's not the common usage. It's not the common usage to do the re-punching, because re-punch used to be used only just for one time thing. Unlike rewrite, it's common because people can write it many times. So it's more common to use re with that kind of thing. Rewrite, revisit. Not that it's not possible. It's possible but not common. So it has not entered in the common usage area. So re-punch would sound weird to mean the reheat. Reheat is kind of unusual because it's not an established practice, right? In sports, in boxing, for example, people don't use the word re-punch, but people prefer to say he hit him again, he punched him again, rather than the re, because it's not common. People don't use it commonly. People don't use it as a common practice, so that it has not entered into the language and has not been learned by people like that. Unlike rewrite or revisit. Other examples like remarry, we have, because it happens a lot, right? So remarry. But re-divorce, not that it's not possible, but it's possible but not as common, because it presumes, it presupposes that you have to divorce first, marry first, and then divorce, and remarry, and re-divorce. So it presupposes many things, so not common. But if you do remarry, more common. Right? Because at least it only involves two stages, marry, divorce, remarry, okay. But you have to do re-divorce like this. But it presupposes remarry also. This is not very common, so you will not see it a lot. And when people use it, it's what we call marked, right? You know the notion of markedness, right? It's marked. Just like the word re-punch is marked and weird, unusual. But if you punch the hole, that's more usual because we do that a lot. So rewrite, revisit, okay, but re-divorce, unusual, and you perhaps will not hear it a lot. Rebuy, also not really common. Not that it's not acceptable, but it's not common. But resell, very common, right? Because it means that you buy it and then you resell it like that. But rebuy, you have to do the reselling first in order to do the rebuy. So not very common. So the reason why it sounds strange, because it's not a common practice and it has not entered into the realm of usage of people. That's why it sounds weird. That's what functionalist perspective will say to you, will give to you. But I don't know how formalist formal linguists would say to this puzzle, this question that why some forms are more common and why some forms are less common, like that. Okay. So that's it for our class. Now you should be able to explain major changes, right, in the history of English after this class. Depending on your orientation, depending on your inclination, theoretical inclination, whether you want to explain it from the formalist side or from the functionalist side, okay? And both are equally valid and both are very influential also, depending on your inclination, your personal inclination, right? And so after this class, you whatever you do, you should be aware of the orientation of each type of explanation, right? If you do pure syntax, if you just generative syntax, generative is Chomsky, generative syntax, then you should know what the goals are. That is to describe the parameters and to describe the principles. But functionalism, we usually use the usage or the function to explain why language has the structure it has, right? Cognitive linguistics is functional linguistics also, right? Why do we have tense and why do we use different tenses based on different cognitive demands like that, okay? So, I hope this semester has given you a lot of things to think about, and in fact, this is only a very broad class, meaning that when you actually go into each area of your research preference, each of the topics that we talk about could be a topic of research and could be a person's specialty, right? Like the use of pronouns, like sound changes, or like parametric changes, and so on, okay? So I hope to see you guys again next semester in a different class, not the same class, and you will stay around until you graduate. And Chol-hee also, right? You stay around in class and also in the office, right? It's a good job in the office. You have a lot of friends to talk to, and someone can give you advice and give you help on linguistic issues that you are not keen on, like that. So hope to see you guys again, and today will be our last class, so we'll meet around campus, not in class, okay? So thank you, see you guys. Yes.